Blog Talk Radio.
Franchise interviews. From Easton, Pennsylvania to Sydney, Australia, you're listening to Franchise Interviews. Franchise Interviews. Welcome to Franchise Interviews, an up-close, behind-the-scenes look at franchising and entrepreneurship. Listen to interviews with franchisers, franchisees, franchise authors, franchise experts, and attorneys. And now, welcome your host, Marty McDermott, and Franchise Interviews.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Franchise Interviews, where for over 18 years now, we've been asking the entrepreneurs one-on-one. I'm your host, Marty McDermott. I'm the president of Franchise Interviews, and we have a great show. You know, one of the key elements to becoming a successful franchisee is strong leadership skills. And we really haven't spoken a lot about this topic over the last 18 years. And today, I'm interviewing Dr. Simon Cleveland, one of the authors of There Is No Box, a practical guide for the relatable leader. And Dr. Cleveland is a professor at Purdue Global, and Dr. Cleveland has decades of experience in complex technical project management for organizations and companies. There Is No Box investigates where leaders start, how they become boxed in upon entering the workforce, and finally, how they can break through those boundaries to become a culturally agile leader and meaningful contributor to our global society. Now let's go right into our interview with Dr. Simon Cleveland, author of There Is No Box, a practical guide for the relatable leader. And the one that really caught my attention is your book. It's called There Is No Box, a practical guide for the relatable leader. And it looks like you wrote this book with, I'm going to say it's your wife, right?
That's correct. The other Dr. Cleveland.
That's fantastic. Right. What was that like? What was that like for you? It must be, for me, it must be an incredible bonding experience to be able to do that with your wife.
Oh, it was absolutely a great exploration of camaraderie, collaboration. Her doctorate is in educational leadership. My second doctorate is in educational leadership. So we actually went to the same university when we were completing our degree. She was ahead of me, but we really kind of merged a number of and synthesized a number of the topics that emerged from our studies for these doctorate degrees, and her experience as an executive director at a company, and from my past background. And we distilled all that knowledge into a few important lessons that I believe will be applicable to anybody who's aspiring to be a leader in any organization. And so that's kind of how this book came to fruition. It was just a collective effort and joy of working through that together.
Right. And, the title, because my background's in marketing, I thought the title was very catchy, is where you say there is no box. And it got me thinking, Simon, I was like, oh, God, it's one of the things I tell my students all the time is to, think outside the box. And I'm saying, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing that all the time. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. One of the things you talk about in the book is you talk about leadership being, and I thought this was really interesting because it's so true, is a lifestyle rather than just a competency. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, how leaders can integrate leadership into, let's say, like their daily lives.
That's a very good question. What we did with this book is we wanted to start a conversation about the fact that, anybody who's aspiring to be a leader needs to understand how they can be relatable, how they can benefit from being relatable, and how to use that relatability to impact through their leadership the areas where they are most ingrained and where they're developing their workforce, their employees. And so we focus on kind of three key points, really. The fact that everybody is a CEO of their own life. That, once people start realizing that they're the boss of their own life, they will be able to be in control of it. And number two, leadership development is an ongoing process. So you don't graduate to become a leader. You continue that process throughout your life. And then there is really no one path to get there. That's another thing. Everybody comes from a different walk of life. And so, regarding your question about the lifestyle, we kind of stress the importance that as leaders, everybody is the CEO of their own life, which means that they make the decisions on their own and carry the responsibility of their actions. And the impact that they have as a leader on the people around them is something that they will be contributing to. So understanding this process, really, leadership is a lifestyle, takes learning and acceptance and not only of your own personal positionality, but of the positionality of others, and then making conscientious choices to accept relatability as a key trait to their own behavior. So, in order to understand their own personality, they need to understand where do they start from, where do people around them, what are their starting lines, and that's really going to kind of help them be responsive to the needs of others and to be more compassionate.
Yeah, no, and it's so powerful, and that's what stuck with me. When I was going over the content for the book, Simon, it's to me, it's kind of like it's this change in mindset, is to be the CEO of your own life. And I was interviewing, and I can't remember which company it was. It was one of the bigger franchises way back when, Simon, and she was saying to me that all of us as individuals, we really have this tremendous opportunity then to practice leadership. Even if we're not necessarily in a leadership role, we do have the opportunity in our daily lives to practice leadership, don't we? I kind of, was thinking about that. As I was reading that caption, I said it's very powerful. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Is the opportunity to practice leadership, even if you're not necessarily have that leadership title.
Yeah, and that's a very key point, is the fact that you don't necessarily need to be in a position of being an appointed manager or leader in an organization. Leadership starts at home, and I think what we are stressing is that you could start leading by an example. Right where you are, in your home, in your community, in your membership of any kind of teams, if you're working in a school, working on a team. So, and that's when you can start practicing, being relatable to others. This is an excellent opportunity to do that. Not to wait until you have been appointed to that, but taking control of your own personal life at the time and the place where you are right now, continuing on that leadership path. And just like we mentioned, because it's a process, we will learn quite a bit of by making these changes and taking control now, that later on when you be promoted, if you're not in that position, you can actually act based on these experiences at that time that you've recognized and developed starting now. Right.
It's very powerful, Simon. There's a book I read many years ago. There's a gentleman I interviewed on my podcast. His name is Scott Shane, and I think he teaches for Case Western University. And he wrote this book called Born Entrepreneurs, Born Leaders. And, because there's this notion out there, I've been doing this podcast now on entrepreneurship for, 17 years. And there's always, I find so much literature out there saying, that someone is a born entrepreneur or someone is a born leader. And I think sometimes, we are born with sometimes certain genetic traits. But, do you feel that, leadership is something that really can be learned by anybody?
I actually do. I think we are not necessarily born leaders. I think we through a process we acquire these characteristics of being more servient, of being more relatable, more adaptable, and that comes through experience and recognition and taking a kind of I keep talking about taking your life in your own hands, being in control of that. So I think that if we just say that somebody is very charismatic, they may be very charismatic in one particular area, and I think there are leadership authors out there who are following that particular path. But in my experience, going through these 20 plus years in the industry and meeting with all kinds of outstanding leaders in their field, I believe that it has taken many years to practice the lessons they have learned and to continue to synthesize that knowledge and to find ways to be more relatable to the people that are working with in order to make an impression. That making that impression to that particular time and place is what really have others recognize that individual as an outstanding leader. And I don't think that happens in a vacuum, and I don't think that happens by genetics, if you wish, or somebody who's just suddenly being appointed to an area to lead, and they do that. They may be able to to demonstrate leadership skills, but that is only because it has happened over time for them, if it has at all.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I agree with everything you said there, Simon, and that's what I got from the book, too, is, that there are sometimes certain genes that help us with, certain careers, like, in other words, if you were tall, then you have a better opportunity to be a basketball player or something like that, so there are sometimes, genetics can help to some extent, but I also agree with you. I also think, that it really could be learned, by anybody. Are there any leaders out there that you particularly admire or, look towards, Simon, that you kind of maybe talk about with your students?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. And sometimes students ask me whether I can recommend a particular individual. And I think that people that I may mention by name really won't relate to anybody that anybody's listening to that podcast. But I think what instead I do is I talk about their behaviors. And there is a chapter in the book that Marissa and I, we talk about the complexity of being a leader and being a project manager. And we highlight a few very important behavioral traits that we essentially we show them as kind of a negative traits that leaders need to aspire to overcome. And so in my experience, the ones that have been successful in overcoming we talk about unrealistic expectations or the ones that are talking about various types of initiatives. They have very poor clarity on the goals and the processes of how they'll get there, or have maybe hidden agendas, or maybe they kind of engage in kind of group think or group shift. These types of behaviors, optimism bias, planning fallacy, delusion of deception, there's quite a bit to unpack here, but individuals that have been able to overcome these types of negative traits, to me, have truly demonstrated outstanding leadership. And so I have seen many of them. Very few have been able to overcome all of them at once. The majority have overcome many of these particular negative behaviors. It's very rare that you find somebody who's become an outstanding leader. But like I said, it's a process. And, just like in project management, they usually ask you, how much would this project cost or how long it will take? As a project manager, I can never give you that information at the beginning of a project with accuracy, I can't give you that with an exact accuracy in the middle of the execution of the project. I can only tell you approximations, but at the end of the project, I can give you the exact number of hours and cost it took. And it's the same thing with leaders. It's a process. It's a life cycle. It's a lengthy time, and it's only at the end of that human's life I could tell you whether the individual had overcome all these obstacles to become an outstanding leader or not. It
sounds like what you're saying. It's funny because this is what we titled the podcast. I mean, you're saying it's a journey to some extent, isn't it?
That's right. It's absolutely a journey.
It's really powerful. My dad used to read all the old school, textbooks on leadership, when I was a kid. I remember my father reading books like from, Tom Peters and Peter Drucker. And so a lot of those, authors, in the old days. So they had I guess it was called an old school philosophy on leadership. And when I'm thinking of your book that you wrote with your wife, Simon, is that, things have changed. You emphasize cultural agility as an essential for modern leadership. Things are a bit different today. I think, when we're thinking of the rules or the principles of leadership, maybe, you could talk about some practical ways that leaders can develop this skill, cultural agility in today's workforce. It's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so culture really is kind of created, as we know, by the members of a society who possess kind of a common collection of attitudes, the knowledge about their reality and the beliefs and experiences. It's not really created in isolation, but it's kind of constructed through communication with this particular society. So what we are trying to come across here with this argument is that to develop cultural agility, relatable leaders should build a high degree of cultural intelligence. This will make them more relatable because they not only would connect with others emotionally on their teams and their organizations, but would also become more sensitive to the values and beliefs and the communication styles of the people from other cultures. And as you mentioned, society has evolved now, and in our organizations, we may have individuals from a variety of cultures. They might have grown up in households from different backgrounds, different language. And so, I frequently like to kind of cite, for example, if we are doing business in Mexico, right, it's a very family-oriented culture. So, being aggressive in that particular environment or trying to take risks is frowned upon. It's more of a, you need to understand who we are. You need to you maybe celebrate some of our holidays together. You need to get to know us before we can actually follow up on a path where you may be recommending certain changes, but we need to trust you first. So it's that's a particular culture that as a leader, an individual will face, and without being culturally agile and enculturated into understanding these concepts, that individual will fail to connect with these people and will have difficulty coming across with their ideas because he will not be trustworthy and would not be a mentor, and they will not follow based on what that individual is trying to guide them to. So in order to become more relatable, individuals need to understand the other people they're working with, what's their background, and in order to be able to open the doors and connect with them and establish this trust.
It's very powerful what you said, Simon. There's a great documentary, and I don't know why I cannot remember the name. I'll have to email it to you. But it was about it was on Netflix, and it was about a Chinese glass company that came to Ohio, and you were talking about the differences in culture, and there was just this tremendous clash between the Americans and the Chinese working together. And, you're right about that. Mexico is a good example, of thinking of a collective society. So it is interesting how, things have changed a bit. What was really stood out, was interesting for me too, because I always talk about, things like empathy, and sort of in thinking of your book, it really got me rethinking. You discussed the importance of use the term, you and your wife, compassionate communication over empathy in leadership. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the differences between both.
Yeah. And by the way, thanks for that documentary. That's American Factory, I believe.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very, very good documentary about the globalization, the labor practices, and absolutely the practicing compassionate communication. That really is kind of the benefit of being relatable is the ease with which we move throughout the world. And so we do this by practicing compassionate communication. Every interaction is viewed from the lens of compassion when we talk about being a relatable leader. And when we are able to do this, things that might have frustrated us in the past no longer do. Right? So, we don't touch upon empathy because empathy is a very, very difficult concept to master. Empathy means you would have definitely experienced the issues that particular individual is dealing with.
That's true.
But when you talk about compassionate communication, it is where you really are compassionate about this individual's and genuinely compassionate about the individual's experiences, and you're looking for ways to support them and to serve them and to help them get through this. And it's important that the individual understands that, so that they're not thinking they're being ridiculed by saying, "Hey, I know what you're going through," and because most of the time leaders don't know what their subordinates or the people they're working with are going through. They can only compassionately converse with them and help them, support them through difficult challenges. So that's what we're trying to make a distinction there and understand the law of compassion and practice that so that they can succeed. Yeah.
That's what I'm getting from the books. I mean, it really is a very practical, contemporary, place as far as where we are with leadership. Because I guess, some of the things maybe, you and I were taught in the old days don't really apply to today's world, do they? Or it's kind of changed a little bit, hasn't it?
That's true.
It really is something. It's the other thing that stood out I was mentioning to you earlier, is you mentioned in the title, no box, and sometimes I make the mistake of talking about thinking outside the box with, if I'm working with the Entrepreneurship Club and things like that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that as how you came up, you and your wife, the expression of no box, because it seems to me like that's a mindset too, or a change in mindset, isn't it, Simon?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, and I appreciate you stressing the importance of that. So really, when we talk about there is no box, relatable leaders view leadership as a non-hierarchical. So what that really means is that it occurs at all levels of the organization, of your community, of your family. And if we can help one leader out there kind of enhance their critical thinking and development, we believe that we would have accomplished this, because leaders are essential because they understand there is no box. They understand that everyone has their own journey to get to where they want to be, and they don't expect everyone to follow the same path. And once we understand that concept, really, we found our way of why not. Why not is what we talk about. Why not try these things? Why not become a leader in our own family, in our own community now? And that's why we say there's no box. Back in the day, they used to teach us that there's a box and think a little bit outside of it, but in reality, there isn't one. We just impose these concepts and these rules, and they're, in a sense, stopping us from kind of advancing ahead in our understanding of leadership. So it's non-hierarchical.
It is. It's very powerful, Simon. Here's some fun questions. What is your favorite word? If you could narrow it down to all the words that we have in the American dictionary, what's your favorite word?
Well, you probably guessed by now. I think that my favorite word is relatability, and leaders' ability to connect with others. That's essentially what relatability is. And, understanding, being compassionate, building trust, fostering engagement, enhancing communication. Those are things that come with being relatable. But to me, relatable or relatability is the word that I much appreciate.
It is, and it's a powerful word, and it's interesting. It's probably not something. Because again, we have so many choice in words. It's nothing that I've heard before. Because I've, doing these podcasts over the years, I've asked my guests like that question before, and that one's never come up. But it's very powerful. Here's an interesting one for you. You might have to think about it. But what sound or noise do you love, Simon?
Yeah, that's a good one. There's so many. I could think of rainfall. The soothing.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Ocean waves, the rhythmic crashing of the waves, crackling fireplace. Yeah,
sure.
The sound.
Those are great.
Laughter, the sound of kind of genuine laughter.
Yeah.
A calm river or a stream.
Sure.
Kind of gentle flow of the water. So all these.
Yeah. I would agree with all those that you suggested, Simon. I think those are great examples. Here's an interesting question for you: is what advice? Because you've done very well. You've had so many publications over the years. It's too many to really count. But what advice would you give to your fellow scholars, or maybe even like your students, in terms of research? I can tell, in researching your background, you and your wife, you're very passionate about research. From everything you've learned up to this point, what advice would you give to whether it's our peers or our students in doing research?
Yeah, that's a good question. And my advice will be to kind of, first of all, consider rooting your research in rigor, relevance, and persistence, right? So, when we talk about research, rigor is very important. Make sure that your research methodologies sound justified, whether, you're using qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods. You have to be meticulous. Pay close attention to the design of a study, how you collect data, how you analyze it. And that, essentially, rigor is not only adding credibility to the findings, but also contributing to the field of body of knowledge in a meaningful way.
Sure.
Relevant, that's a big thing for me. So, anybody that's doing research needs to strive to kind of bridge the gap between theory and practice. In project management, that's a field where research can have a kind of direct impact on industry practices. So, focusing on questions that address real-world challenges, considering how the findings can inform better decision strategy, and engaging with industry professionals and staying kind of ahead to emerging trends. That's important. And then I mentioned persistence and patience. The research process can be long and demanding. Takes quite a bit of reading, quite a bit of synthesis. So formulating a research question, from that step on all the way to getting published, that journey requires patience and persistence. So, don't be discouraged by having setbacks. I can't tell you how many times I've submitted papers to journals, how many times they've been rejected before crystallizing and redoing the work and then submitting again. So rejection of manuscripts or of any kind of experiment, things will happen, things will go not as planned. So consider that each challenge is an opportunity to kind of refine your work and grow as a researcher. So
I think that's great advice, Simon. And it sounds like, you and your wife are probably, it's almost part, I assume maybe it's part of like your daily routine is like you're always doing something in terms of research. Is there like another book in the future for you and your wife? Are you kind of writing another one right now? Or?
Yeah, we're thinking about another book that's going to focus a little bit more on, I think we're thinking about naming it Boil the Ocean, where taking it to the next step. It's learning how to manage your boss. That's a topic that we've been kind of exploring. And how do you manage your boss? In this first book, we've kind of focused on the concept of how do you become a better leader by being relatable. But now it's like, how do we make our bosses understand who we are, and how do we manage them better so that we can get the job done?
Wow, that sounds like a great book, and I'm sure a lot of people would love to read something like that as well, Simon. So the name of the book currently is There Is No Box, a practical guide for the relatable leader. How do listeners to the podcast, Simon, how do they get access to the book? I mean, do they go to something like Amazon? Is that the best place to go to pick it up? Or
actually, the book's available in Barnes & Noble. Like we were not long ago in New York City, and it was right on Broadway.
Wow, what does that feel like?
It was great to see that. Not so much for Marissa. I mean, she's published a number of books. She's a New York Times bestseller. So she's seen her books. But for me, it was just a very interesting experience to walk into a bookstore and sit there. So readers can get it from their Barnes & Noble or just request it, and the book will be ordered for them, or Amazon or any of the online retailers.
Coming up in our next segment, we'll be playing a clip from our Great Quotes in Franchising podcast right here on Franchise Interviews.
Franchise Interviews, an up-close, behind-the-scenes look at franchising and entrepreneurship.
Through our website, franchiseinterviews.com, where you can hear and read interviews as well as get tips from some of the most successful sources in franchising.
And our weekly franchise radio show, where each week you get to hear a new interview with franchisors, franchisees, franchise authors, experts, and attorneys. And don't forget to listen to our podcast, Great Quotes in Franchising. For more information, go to franchiseinterviews.com or call us at 610-905-2919.
That's 610-905-2919.
Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising. With each podcast, you get to hear a great quote in franchising. Don and I have been hosting Franchise Interviews this week is years and 100 shows, and during that time frame, we've had some incredible guests and quotes on our show. Today, you're going to get to hear from, I think, one of the best motivational speakers in the world, Mr. Warren Greshus. And Warren talks about the importance of planning ahead and insurance. And for our very first time on our partnership with Blog Talk Radio, Franchise Interviews is now giving franchisors the opportunity to sponsor some upcoming radio shows. So once again, Mr. Warren Greshus, after a word from our sponsor, and we'll see you again soon with another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising from Franchise Interviews. Take care, everyone.
Franchise Interviews. For over 2 years now, Franchise Interviews has been giving you an up-close, behind-the-scenes look at franchising and entrepreneurship.
Through our website, franchiseinterviews.com, where you can hear and read interviews as well as get tips from some of the most successful sources in franchising.
And our weekly franchise radio show, where each week you get to hear a new interview with franchisors, franchisees, franchise authors, experts, and attorneys.
And our free franchise newsletter, which is a must-read for anyone looking to buy a franchise.
And don't forget to listen to our podcast, Great Quotes in Franchising. For more information, go to franchiseinterviews.com or call us at 610-905-2919.
That's 610-905-2919.
Like insurance and things like that?
Yeah, One of the areas you address when talking about entrepreneurship is the importance of disability insurance, health savings accounts, and health insurance. I know my father-in-law was had his own insurance business, New York City, and he always talked about the importance of disability insurance. So maybe talk about those couple things a little bit for entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. You know, the thing about disability insurance, a couple of things about it. First, it's a must. It must if you're going to own your own business. Remember, one of the big problems with owning your own business as opposed to working for a company is that you don't have a safety net. You know, when you work for somebody else, especially when you work for a large company, they're going to supply you with health insurance. They're going to supply you with a disability policy. They're also probably going to supply you with a small life insurance policy. But the second you leave that company, all that stuff is gone. And you're really going to need that disability insurance. And God forbid something happens to you and you're unable to work. Essentially, you're out of business. Well, disability insurance is going to give you an income. Now, remember something about disability insurance. Here's the important thing to remember. You cannot get disability insurance if you do not already have an income. And if you're first starting your own business, you're not going to have an income. So what I did was I knew I was going to go into my own business. So while I was working for somebody else and was making an income, I started buying disability insurance.
Right.
And so while you're working, you must, the whole thing about starting a business, if you're not planning ahead before you get into that business, don't go into business. You know, that's why I saved my money. That's why I bought disability insurance. I had disability insurance when I went into business because I knew once I started for the first few years I wasn't going to be able to buy any more because I didn't have an income. I wasn't paying myself.
Right.
Now, so when you're working, buy as much as you – if you know you're going to go into your own business, if you have any desire or plans to do it, buy as much as you can. You know, insurance companies will only give you as much as your income allows. You know, you can't buy as much as you want. They judge it according to the amount of income you have coming in. Now, once my speaking business started to take off, and every time my income rose, I bought more disability insurance.
Right.
I got a ton of disability insurance. God forbid anything ever happens to me, I've got a nice income coming in every single month. Now, once I hit 65, I'm not going to need it anymore. And they're not going to give it to me anymore either. The other thing about health savings accounts, you know, as a small business owner, you're going to get really destroyed by health insurance. The premiums are monstrous. The costs are ridiculous, but you got to have it. You can't afford to get sick, and you can't afford to let hospital and doctor bills put you out of business.
Right.
For years, I had health accounts, health insurance that were killing me. But, you know, when the health savings accounts came out, I realized, and I went to somebody, you know, I always had a good insurance agent. That's another thing. You know, there's a lot of things you should skimp on as a small business owner. Watch your pennies. Watch your overhead. You know, things like long-distance telephones, you know, cell phone plan, you know, all that sort of stuff. You know, overhead, watch it. But the one thing you don't want to skimp on is expert advice.
Right.
You got to have a good lawyer, a good accountant, and a good insurance agent. You know, those people, don't worry about paying them. You know, if you're going to, don't look to skimp on an accountant, a lawyer, or an insurance agent, because you're going to end up with a crummy one. And a crummy one is going to cost you more than what you're paying out. So get good people. I have a great agent, and he advised me on the health savings accounts, found me someone to work with, and now I have a health savings account for my business. You know, it's a low premium, high deductible plan with great tax deductibility in it. It's the greatest tool for a very small business. And I'm a big believer in that. You should also have life insurance. You know, when you're in your own business, you want to protect your family, you need life insurance. But I cannot emphasize enough planning ahead and buying disability while you're still working and making a good income before you start your business, because then at least you're giving yourself some sort of safety net. Don't allow catastrophic things beyond your control to put you out of business.
Right.
Such an important point you bring up, especially something like disability insurance. No one's going to think of that. No one thinks of themselves as getting sick. Everyone's trying to stay positive, starting a new business, but you got to set yourself up across the board starting a business, just not things like this, putting together a business plan and calculating how long you can go, before you make a salary. And
I'll tell you something. You're more likely to get hurt than you are to die.
Right.
So disability insurance is very important.
Absolutely.
That's
Franchise Interviews. From Easton, Pennsylvania to Sydney, Australia, you're listening to Franchise Interviews. Franchise Interviews.